Okay, let's get started. Good afternoon to everyone. This is Kyle Welch with RCR Wireless News. I want to thank everyone for attending M2M and Connected Cars. How can rural America prepare for a connected evolution? Presented by CCA, the Competitive Carriers Association, and Mosaik. Our presenters today are Chip Strange, VP Products and Technology at Mosaik Solutions, Bradley Blinken, VP Industry Development at CCA, and James Barker, partner at Latham & Watkins. At this time, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Brad.
Thanks, Kyle. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Brad Blinken. I work at the Competitive Carriers Association, or CCA. I think most folks are familiar with what we do, but as a primer for our time today, I want to just quickly highlight some of the things that we're most proud of. CCA is the premier organization for advocacy in the wireless space. We represent over 100 operators and several hundred vendors or suppliers to those carriers. We really are the voice of the large rural and regional operators on Capitol Hill and at the FCC. In addition to our traditional advocacy efforts, I think most folks enjoy our two events a year, one in the spring and one coming up in a few weeks in Las Vegas, beginning of September. And then my role at the association is centered around building programs and services that the carriers can use to help make the competitive environment even more interesting. So I appreciate everybody coming today. I'm going to hand it off to Jim and let Jim say hello.
Great. Hey, everybody. My name is Jim Barker. I'm a partner at Latham & Watkins in the Washington, D.C. office. Part of the reason I'm doing the panel today is that I've actually had the benefit of being able to approach today's topic from two different perspectives. One is as a representative of a number of wireless carriers through the years, but the other is I have represented different, automobile manufacturers, including Toyota and others, for quite a long time before the FCC in connection with telematics and connected car issues. And so it's been interesting to see how the OEM perspective has evolved as these services have evolved. So hopefully I'll be able to bring some perspective to you today. And I'll turn it over to Chip.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chip Strange. I'm responsible for product management and marketing at Mosaik Solutions. Many of you will know who Mosaik Solutions is, I'm sure, but we've been supporting the wireless industry with telecom business intelligence and geospatial solutions for now just over 25 years. We appreciate the opportunity to discuss this really interesting time that we're all experiencing right now as the types of devices that are connecting to our networks continue to change. And today we're going to talk a little bit about, from the lens of a normal family summer vacation, how those types of devices are changing the levels of expectations between consumers, operators, and vehicle manufacturers. So first of all, I'd like to thank Brad and Jim for participating in this with us today. And I'd also like to thank two members of my team here at Mosaik Solutions, Catherine McDonald, our creative director, and Blake Graves, who have worked very hard on pulling together this information that hopefully you guys will find valuable. We look forward to an interactive session with you today, and we'll do our best to try to answer as many questions as we can. And just to set expectations, this is going to try to be a bit like a panel discussion. The three of us will be interacting with one another. There's not really a defined script. We're just going to try to have some fun, try to provide some informative information, and we'll go from there. So today's agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about the Internet of Things. We're going to talk about how the Internet of Things will impact a family and their road trip. Some background about connected vehicles, and then really get into some of the challenges faced on the road experiences, and try to sort of highlight some of the both opportunities and challenges as those dynamics start to change. And again, we're looking forward to having some time at the end for questions and answers. Okay, so I'm sure most of you don't need a traditional definition of the Internet of Things, but basically, generally, it is anything that is interconnected with the network, whether they be mobile, wired, Wi-Fi, etc. And what's interesting about this is that while these numbers of devices, as we're going to explore later, continue to just frankly explode, the value of the information that they're transmitting and or the service that they're providing are starting to change how those operators are being forced to support those needs. So there are lots of things that are being that are in this Internet of Things ecosystem. We've all of us have seen sort of the swell of home automation type services. We've seen all sorts of M-Health services begin to explode, and the connected vehicles has certainly been around for a while, but we're starting to see very, very clear changes in that space specifically. So this is just some background metrics on another forecast of exactly how much the mobile devices will be growing over the coming years. We see very clearly massive growth continuing, but we're also seeing obviously the tailing off of non-smartphones, steady growth with smartphones, but a very, very big shift in machine to machine. We are really just starting to see the explosion of machine-to-machine growth, and the connected car, the connected vehicles are a piece of that pie. Again, another slide, not surprising to anyone who keeps up with the wireless industry, but data use is continuing to radically change as well. And obviously, for all the operators on this attending this webinar, I don't have to tell you what the growth of mobile video is going to mean to how you manage your networks and spectrum assets going forward. This is, these are all forecasts, of course, but we can all expect to see really, really considerable growth. Specific to machine, we're with respect to machine module growth as well. Although the devices are going to continue to grow by a very healthy clip over the next 4 or 5 years, the amount of data traffic that they're going to be transmitting is also going to go up a lot. And I was just reading this morning the latest report from Chetan Sharma. He does a quarterly U.S. market report, and it was really interesting that in the second quarter of 2014, what he characterizes as connected devices made up 84% of net adds of U.S. operators that he tracks. Now, it's not really a surprise in one respect, but 84% of anything is a lot, right? And so the importance of maintaining, and while you're seeing continued growth in the machine-to-machine device realm, we have to ultimately all support these devices going forward. And so when you're experiencing that much growth, it inevitably puts a lot of stress on the service providers and solutions providers who are providing services to those devices. And finally, from a growth standpoint, it's also interesting to note that while we're starting to see fourth generation and LTE networks come into the forefront of some consumer marketing, as we'll get into later, the real growth occurring with machine-to-machine devices over the next several years is still going to be across 2G and 3G networks. We have some very interesting things going on with 2G network turndowns and spectrum refarming and the like that are going on. Nonetheless, we're going to see, it's going to be a couple of years, I think, before we get into real machine-to-machine device growth in the 4G and LTE realm.
Yeah, and it's Jim. I would just jump in and echo that. I think one thing that's getting lost. People should realize that when we talk about these connected vehicle things, while we've had embedded telematics for a long time now, which is a basic type of has emerged as a basic type of vehicle connectivity. A lot of what's getting today's hype at the Consumer Electronics Show, for example, this year is a lot of the interesting infotainment and 4G related features, but really from the core OEM perspective, a lot of, and while the infotainment things are sexy and are very much a part of trying to meet consumer demand for mobile environment in the vehicle, the growth at least in the near term is going to continue to be on 2G, 3G networks, and really will still continue to, I think, to center around garden variety safety and security, features from an M2M perspective.
Thanks, Jim. So we're going to get ready to go on a road trip with a selected family here, and in this particular road trip, we're going to explore different types of devices and services that will be used by our family across a roughly 1,200-mile road trip. So we'll have the connected car itself. We'll have an mHealth device. Our family dog will have a pet tracker. The family enjoys a smart home that certainly represents a big part of the Internet of Things. We'll certainly have a whole array of personal mobile devices, and the vehicle will also interact with an e-toll service, which is not necessarily a traditional consumer mobile service, but is a vehicles service in many parts of the country that enjoy tolls. So we're going to explore a road trip from the Denver, Colorado area up to Yellowstone National Park. And the family will all experience different types of needs from the network. Some of them are vitally critical to the trip itself. Some of them are obviously vitally critical to the health of one member of the family. And then the rest of them will be a lot of the typical consumer device needs that we're also used to dealing with. So now we're going to introduce you to the family. This is the Jones family. We have mom and dad who are both professionals. Mom is going to be working more than dad will be on this trip, but she's going to need to be connected. She's going to need to make sure that she can use her laptop while she's in the vehicle, and obviously she's looking forward to spending time with the family. Each one of them will have different priorities, and so we have to recall that you've got multiple devices. Some of them could be consumer, some of them could be business, that will be interacting with different networks on this trip. So now we have Grams and Sarah. So the grandmother is looking forward to spending time with their granddaughter, of course. We'll also be keeping up with her blood sugar levels, and she'll be playing a lot of games and interacting with social media a bit while she's on the road. And as is typical with Sarah, she'll be tweeting and Instagramming and Facebooking with her friends, consuming a little mobile video service, and obviously hopefully enjoying her trip. And then of course we have Duke, and no child these days seems to be without their own mobile device, and Duke is not different. He has a tag pet tracker so we can keep a good eye on him and know where he is at all times to ensure that he's safe, and while at least exploring one of our wonderful national parks, he doesn't get exposed to any of the wildlife in the area who might enjoy him for a snack. All right, so now we're getting ready to go, and as we evaluate getting the home all prepared, we recognize that, as I said before, you're going to see multiple networks being consumed by each service, and in some respects, of course, we have to assume that the consumer may not understand that, and that you could have, theoretically, you could have up to 4 different types of personal devices that are communicating with the network, with different networks, as well as a vehicle that has its own data plan with the network. So when we think about this, making sure that everyone is prepared to understand what their network experience is going to look like is important. And so this is getting up into a very rural part of the country that has terrain challenges and just remote challenges associated with a remote part of the country. So being able to set those types of expectations is obviously important ahead of that trip. So this webinar, of course, is emphasizing connected cars. So we're going to talk about a couple of different, and there are many different types of manufacturers and service providers out in the field. But some of the ones that are forefront of recent marketing activities certainly include OnStar. When people think about consumer telematics services, OnStar certainly is at the forefront, right? They've been around for a long time, heavily emphasizing their services from a safety and security perspective. However, what's interesting very recently is the shift toward focusing on the vehicle's relationship and the services relationship with LTE networks. And this is a big shift, right? And obviously, OnStar is predominantly used within the GM General Motors family of vehicles. Nonetheless, they are really working hard now to differentiate the fact that OnStar services are capable of having LTE-supported Wi-Fi hotspots, in addition to certainly their traditional safety and security features. A relative new entry in the world of at least consumer marketing and telematics services is Audi, who has, along with OnStar, really started aggressively marketing LTE network availability within or for the vehicle, and they're the first specific automobile manufacturer that I have seen, at least, that's gotten this aggressive, positioning themselves as positioning their vehicles as effectively a mobile device. And it's fascinating. I think it certainly highlights the needs that are being explored by the needs that are being expressed to Audi from their customers, and how this is changing the manner with which the customer thinks about their vehicle and whether or not they think about how the vehicle is connecting to the network. And this is one of the many opportunities that operators and telematics service providers and automobile manufacturers have right now, as the control or the influence over the customer continues to spread.
And I would just jump in and say, just again emphasize that it's still, though, pretty nascent. I mean, it is true, as Chip's mentioned, that you've got, GM, Audi, Tesla, a number of folks experimenting with embedded LTE connectivity and building LTE modems into the car, and that is certainly in response to anticipated consumer demand. But I would just emphasize, I think this is still very much a work in progress by the OEMs, and each one has a different philosophy, and they're all still working out, I think, the balance that needs to be struck between embedded services and whether they're going to roll forward with an embedded connectivity solution versus pursuing mobile device connectivity. And right now they're doing both. I mean, the question is really kind of, people talk about a smartphone with wheels. Is that what we're really making here, or are we viewing the vehicle more as kind of an accessory to a service that the consumer's bringing into the vehicle, and basically just facilitating connectivity? Right now, they're doing both, but that's part of the exciting thing that's happening right now, both from the customer and the OEM perspective, is sort of how these new platforms and sort of business models are evolving around these connected service offerings. but it's a nascent time.
Yeah, and I may add, this is Brad. I would say, in our experience, if we go back in the history of wireless, we always see kind of that inflection point of where the devices start to deliver on other than the defined expectations, similar to like when BlackBerry launched and they said, we're going to give you text-based email. They did that really, really well. And then when they started trying to get attachments and things, that's where it started to get blurry. But the car expectation, maybe I want to drive and get directions, but more and more people are saying, well, I also want to be able to just name a song and have that play, or call somebody, or just like on our phone, there's, like Jim said, the difference between a phone with wheels or a car with the phone or some kind of internet attachment. So one of the key points I think Chip touched on earlier was around the ownership of the subscriber. Who does the subscriber really think is their service provider if they buy an Audi and they really have no relationship with any service provider, yet there's 100 operators in the U.S. that are responsible for making those networks work. And it's a very interesting dynamic when the subscriber doesn't know they're subscribing, or they have a different expectation, so this thing fails and they're now blaming their service provider or their operator versus the Audis of the world that may be more responsible. So I think it's a key distinction to look at as we're looking at this inflection point of car manufacturers being limited service providers. Thanks, Chip.
Thanks, guys. And I would just add that knowing that the vehicle is by a factor a more expensive item, the automobile manufacturers have a great deal of risk as we're going through this inflection point, with exposing to their service departments extraordinarily complex issues related to how the device interacts with the mobile network, or how the car interacts with the mobile network. As well, the fact that right now, at least with Audi, my understanding, and Jim, you may want to jump back in here, that there's really no harmony between the data plan of the vehicle and the data plan of the owner, even if, as in Audi's case, it has a network relationship with AT&T. I could have an AT&T service from my personal device and devices, but I won't be able to simply add on my vehicle to my account. The way that the relationship is structured, Audi has the relationship directly with the consumer, so I can't just add it on as if I would add on another line for my child.
Well, it's a great point. I mean, both industries, both on the carrier side and the OEM side, are still trying to figure out, I think, how these things will be priced. There are clear reasons why the OEMs would want to continue to enhance connectivity on an embedded basis in the vehicle. I mean, just because I think it was the chairman, one of the GM executives said it's making the car a better vehicle. So, you have better diagnostics that allow you, more efficiencies in tracking warranties. You can have better customer relations and being able to get all this data scraped from the back of those head units and sort of track what your customers are doing. The whole rise of the usage-based telematics insurance industry that we've seen in the previous years is all related to the automotive business. So there's core automotive things that have been improved, and will continue to be improved from improved connectivity. And again, though, I think that's more on the embedded basis. But for these consumer applications, sort of enhancing the wireless environment in the vehicle, you're absolutely right. And so that's where you see these, I think the industry is really trying to scratch its head, the automotive industry, is there really a market for a vehicle-based pricing plan? How can we make it easier for our consumer to just add such a plan or, to his existing plan, but that would then require that the underlying carrier that's supporting the vehicle operations be the same, as the consumers. Audi is, I believe, chosen AT&T, and as part of, AT&T's got a kind of embedded end-to-end solution called AT&T Drive, and I think Audi's part of that, GM's part of that. I think AT&T's also supporting Tesla, but other manufacturers, other OEMs are being supported by other carriers. So that is another problem that's got to sort itself out, and I don't think it's been sorted out in a satisfactory way yet.
Thanks, guys. So one other manufacturer that we thought had an interesting position was Toyota. They've taken from a marketing and from a consumer marketing standpoint, they've taken a very sort of progressive view and encompassed next generation telematics into their Smart Mobility Society campaign and innovation hub. They're looking to bring together several aspects of a mobile lifestyle and are really sort of speaking as or positioning it much more like a futurist standpoint today. So you have the long-running OnStar example that's been around for a while and changing the manner with which the types of services that they're promoting with their overall solution. You have Audi that's come in fast and hard, focusing on LTE and spending a lot of marketing dollars to do so. And then you have Toyota, who's taking a little bit of a less aggressive position while embedding the telematics piece of it along with a much broader mobile society type of ideation. So it's three disparate types of use cases and examples. So I think it's important to point out that regardless of the telematics service provider or the automobile manufacturer and how many devices there are today, it is just a small percentage of what will be coming based on current forecasts. And obviously, those of us in the wireless business are used to trying to digest forecasts that in some cases are accurate, in some cases are not. Nonetheless, I think it's fair to say that there will be a lot more connected everything in the future, including connected cars. And so regardless of whether these numbers are close to being right or not, it's a completely different dynamic that we're going to have to deal with. A couple of highlights from this infographic. Today, roughly 14% of new cars have an embedded connectivity. By 2018, it's expected to have 46% globally in the world and 80% of the vehicles in the United States. So that is a massive shift. And again, even if that number is overstated, even if it's 50% of the vehicles in the U.S., we're talking about a lot of cars. Now, of course, those are cars who can connect to the network. It's not to say that they all will, especially, of course, someone has to pay for the services. Nonetheless, it's a very, very opportunistic challenge, I guess, to phrase it that way. So I wanted to spend a couple of minutes here just talking about some of the different ways that a connected car can actually connect to a mobile network. We've highlighted three different ways. The majority of the vehicles today have embedded systems, and these are embedded, meaning heavily integrated with the vehicle, doing a lot of remote, monitoring of the diagnostic systems and performance of the vehicle itself. That's obviously an advantage to the manufacturer of the vehicle itself, knowing sort of what's going on with their vehicle and many times perhaps before it breaks. Handling software updates, integrating with applications, and obviously the safety systems that we're used to seeing at least positioned in the marketplace. However, there are other ways to get a mobile network effectively inside of a vehicle. There are tethered systems where you're effectively tied to the mobile device, the consumer mobile device. And then there are some integrated systems that effectively not only use the device as sort of like a modem of sorts, but actually can take the information on the device and display that within the vehicle itself. I think it's important to point out that the risks on the automobile manufacturers are really great as they start making bets about the technologies to enable in their vehicles. The automobile industry has a runway of 4 to 7 years on the technology in the vehicle. So any decision that's made that's incorrect is really, really expensive, and so the bets that they're making are risky, and that's why this time is so so interesting for them as we move forward. So here we just showed some forecasts of what types of connectivity will be within in the cars of the future, and you've got your embedded, you've got tethered, and you have integrated. It's interesting to see that that while embedded and integrated devices continue to grow, the forecast is that you'll see integrated devices surpassing embedded here in the next calendar year. Tethered devices will sort of plateau and start to fall off. And I think this is based on research that suggests that the user, the driver and or the owner of the vehicle that isn't really interested in just having their personal device serve as a modem for the car. They really want a better user experience. And so that in some respects makes the stakes that much higher for both the network operators as well as the manufacturers of the vehicles themselves. And ultimately, as we all know, it leads to having a connected lifestyle. In this example, you're marrying two really high-tech things, and especially in the United States, it's pretty well documented that we love our cars in this country, and obviously we love our wireless technologies and high-tech services wherever we want them. And you're seeing this manifest itself in the vehicle that we've highlighted here with the Tesla, where you've got a hot new vehicle technology married with obviously having access to mobile networks, and then just an absolutely incredible visual experience in the vehicle. For people that haven't seen a Tesla, this is when I first saw this image, I thought it was a mock-up. This is actual shot of what a screen option inside of a Tesla can look like, and you can see just how much content could be displayed in that screen should the manufacturer of the vehicle and or the integrated device support it. And so, connected cars are a fraction of the connected mobile devices. We're certainly hitting points in different geographies or different parts of the world where you're starting to see 100% penetration for human being penetration, and yet we still have all these other devices that either haven't been invented yet or haven't been connected yet. And so as we move forward, the types of information that are needed to be able to support these considerably more devices in the marketplace really run the gamut. You're seeing telematics service providers having to effectively support as if they're a mobile network, right? As if they're an operator, and making massive investments into ensuring that they understand what the network experience should be so that they can respond as quickly as possible, most especially when we're dealing with safety and security features, which quite frankly, just have to work, right? So you're seeing car companies effectively having to think about the wireless industry and thinking about wireless consumers in a way that they haven't had to consider before. And this must be an extraordinarily daunting task, because we all know, having worked in this industry and having seen it grow, how complex it is to deliver these amazing services to consumers and businesses alike. And so you now have someone or companies who are used to putting their own amazing things in the marketplace with vehicles, now having to deal with an extraordinarily complex new effectively a new feature that they are enabling. So they're really going to need to start thinking about how they support their customers in real time, which is not necessarily something that car manufacturers are used to, right? You buy the car, you leave the lot, you drive it for a while. When you have a problem, you sort it out, you take a tow truck or you make it to the car dealer or your mechanic and they fix it, right? Now you're starting to have a real-time experience with the consumer, and that's going to need a lot of information. All right, so we've talked enough about connected cars and the market generally. Let's go. Let's get on our road trip. We've got to ensure that the house is, our smart home is all set up to manage itself to a certain extent while we're away. And everyone, once they pile into the car, starts to get prepared for what will be about an 8 or 9 hour drive. We have Mom's getting ready to do some work. Sarah's getting some video set up. Grandma's playing online games, and the trusty dog is trying to do what all good dogs do on road trips and stick his head out of the window. So as we leave Denver, we're inevitably going to hit some tolls based on where we live. And, it's interesting, toll roads are something that many of us in this country don't experience. I'm thankful that we don't experience it here in Memphis where I live. Nonetheless, you're starting to see this is one way of vehicles communicating with vehicles independent of the driver in many ways, communicating with other types of communication services. So you have no workers at these types of toll booths, and it's easy because they can either bill you with your little express pass, or they can snapshot your car tag and drop the bill in the mail to you. So as we head up the road here, we've gone north here, and we've managed to get ourselves up into Wyoming and are running just west of Laramie. Starting to experience some different types of network concerns due to the rural nature of the networks, due to some terrain. Nonetheless, it's really not having any issue. Our mHealth device has worked well for grams. There are lower bandwidth types of services that Sarah is able to use that she can stay entertained. And mom and dad are in good shape, settled into their trip, and happy to be gone. One thing that we wanted to point out was the sort of contrast between a reality, which is that there are many census blocks in the United States that have a registered zero population. And what's fascinating about this is that it speaks to just how small some census blocks are, but also that does not necessarily mean, in many cases it hardly ever means, that there aren't mobile networks there, and or that mobile networks are not needed. Just because people don't live there does not mean that networks are not required by consumers for a range of different uses. We just thought this was interesting, an interesting graphic that the census, based on the census data, that shows just how many areas are very thinly populated in this country, and I think it speaks to the amazing job that operators have done in the United States to try to extend networks in areas that are not very well populated. It's a testament to their commitment to their customers, and I think it's something that we should all be very, very proud of. All right, so we've traveled up farther north. We're stopped for some fuel, and it's getting into off of main roads, or certainly off of interstates. One of the interesting things about telematics services going forward will be, whether or not they have the capability of operating on multiple types of air interface technologies, and obviously multiple networks. There are many devices in the market today, of course, that have fallbacks. Most of our devices will fall back to networks if they are there. However, when we start getting into the fact that our country has multiple air interface technologies, this can start to create some issues for 2G and 3G services in very, very remote areas where there may be less or fewer networks to choose from. This is also an opportunity as we move forward as well for satellite communications providers to satellite wireless communications providers to deliver services to high value devices, and I think that certainly cars could possibly fit in that realm. As you can see here with our map mock-ups, the different networks that are available in the market start to get, they just vary, right? It doesn't mean that there are no networks available on the route. It just means that the quality of the networks and the availability of the networks could vary between different operators. We also researched something that was interesting when we look at other markets. In Europe, they've mandated that vehicles have access to emergency services. Now, obviously, the regulatory environment in Europe is far, far different than it is in the United States, and I don't believe that there are any. I don't think that there's any active. There could be active discussions, but certainly nothing imminent that would demand that we start treating vehicles like we have mandated the treatment of personal devices. Nonetheless, it is an interesting thing to point out that there are other parts of the world who have demanded that vehicles be available or be capable of communicating with emergency services and at a statutory level.
Yeah, this is Jim. I just note that the FCC in this country, did explore, imposing that mandate on telematics and then by extension to vehicles. But the line that we've drawn here in the U.S. is between what we call core telematics services and personal calling services. So it's sort of an intuitive line. If you can make a call to the outside world and the car is functioning like a cell phone on an embedded basis, then you should treat it like a cell phone and you should regulate it like a cell phone, and therefore there would be a requirement to be able to do something like eCall, basically have an E911 functionality. But if you're doing simply automated crash notification or core telematics services in the U.S., there hasn't been the regulators haven't thought that we needed to impose that on industry, and it is the case that most of the manufacturers do offer that suite of services. Mix of pricing, some are offering them for free, but that need is pretty much being met in the U.S. on an unregulated basis. In Europe, it was thought that the eCall was going to go ahead and jumpstart, more of an ecosystem and sort of interoperable connected car ecosystem. That kind of remains to be seen, because maybe similar to this country, there's a lot of legislation and implementation that's gotten bogged down in the regulatory process. So the eCall initiative really hasn't been rolled out yet, even though there's a deadline of 2017 for manufacturers to be compliant. So that will probably slip, but it is a fundamental difference between the EU and the US.
All right, so our family is getting close to their destination. There are a range of different types of activities going on, interacting with our mobile networks, and so we thought it'd be a good time to talk a little bit very briefly about some of the types of services that are being used specific to telematics and infotainment. So we certainly have higher bandwidth types of infotainment services, a lot of it related to video and cloud computing. We have lower bandwidth, which we're all used to, right? Your typical Twitter grade social networking, engaging with traditional email services. We have nav, and nav is getting much more interesting as we move forward as it starts to require much more real-time information, whether it be traffic data, weather information, fuel prices, etc. You have your traditional vehicular-centric telematics services where you've got your safety and security features, being able to remotely control certain features from the web. And finally, you have other types of services that are starting to break in, where you've got insurance tracking devices, fleet management services, which of course have been around for a while, and vehicular control of payment services and parking lots and the like. As we marry the types of infotainment, nav, and telematics services with the different types of connectivity options, it's very interesting to note, though, that in some respects, not all services or connectivity options work well with the types of services that are being offered or demanded by consumers. And so, again, this is another area where the service providers and the manufacturers have to think through what those customer expectations should be and how they develop their technologies to meet them. All right, so we've arrived at Yellowstone now, and our family will be spending a couple of days. They've had a successful trip, and they're going to do some exploration in the car and out of it, of course. I think it's important to remind everyone that putting networks, wireless networks inside of national and state parks can be pretty challenging, both from a site acquisition standpoint as well as from a zoning standpoint. And of course, no one wants cell sites in areas of prestigious, glorious venues like parks, and yet at the same time they all complain when they don't have services, right? So it's a tricky problem for operators. So now we're going to head back down. We're going to go stop in Jackson, Wyoming for a couple of days. We certainly have access to plenty of high quality networks in a heavy tourist area like this that's obviously demands it. We do have an event, unfortunately, where our dog escapes from us for a few minutes and runs out in the area around Antler Arches in Jackson. Fortunately for us, our pet tracking tag, our tag pet tracking service has worked well. We were able to split up between the four of us and use the service to run him down several hundred yards away. The family finally they've made it back home after several more days in Jackson. We were able to have a pretty good connected car experience and connected device experience while on our road trip. We're very fortunate, of course, that we didn't have any health problems, we didn't have any car problems, and everyone had a pretty successful time. I do think, though, as I said earlier, we have to be thinking proactively about what types of considerations are for how each one of the constituencies, the car makers, the telematics providers, and the carriers need to do to improve their customer experience. And it's obviously a reminder that as the amount of traffic continues to go up across telematics services, that the car makers are going to need more mobile partners. They'll need more sophisticated traditional M2M service and solution providers. You could see an environment where they start to engage directly with operators more as that traffic and economic scale continues to go up. And like looking in our rearview mirror for a second, the traditional telematics services have been, with a couple of exceptions, more sort of wholesale type of operations. And as the stakes get raised you're gonna see a flux, I believe, of auto manufacturers really start to engage directly with operators because they want to be closer to that customer experience, and so it'll be interesting to see how the market develops. So highlighting a couple of unknowns going forward, as Jim mentioned earlier and Brad mentioned earlier, where the lines get drawn with respect to who owns the customer experience. And of course, this is especially tricky knowing that the customer ultimately gets to decide who they believe should own their customer experience, whether it's an application developer on their device, the car manufacturer, the telematics provider, or the underlying network operator. Will they be smartphones on wheels, or will they just be providing data services? Again, we're going to go through a phase of experimentation, and we'll see how that ends up shaking out. It's also, of course, important to point out that vehicular mobile services are limited by the quality of mobile networks, and should they experience issues, it's going to negatively impact the customer experience and obviously end up hurting whoever it is that the customer ultimately blames for that experience. And then, as I said before, there are a range of different types of services in addition to, obviously, making the best network choice, ensuring that there are plenty of options in the device's system selection capability, but also ensuring that you're setting the right expectation and you're empowering the right teams within your organization to be able to support the customer when they have issues. As we all know, unfortunately, they tend not to call when things are going great. They only reach out to you when they're unhappy about something. So a couple of ideas on how all of the constituents that we've discussed today, whether they be connected car manufacturers, telematics providers, or carriers, it's really important in this environment to be very transparent about what the customer should experience. Making very clear claims on where the network should be available and where they shouldn't, I think is important to setting those expectations. There's a certain percentage, of course, all customers that are irrational. But generally speaking, if the customer understands the service that they're going to get and they understand where they're not going to get it, they tend to be pretty rational about understanding, that oh yeah, this was an area where there isn't a network available. The other thing too is ensuring that due to the diversity of this market, and especially the United States market, which is an incredible environment for all of us to work in, that as we move forward, that the telematics providers and car manufacturers have the same type of information that operators do about the competitive options that exist, the wholesale options that exist, and as they continue to throw more and more money on the wireless networks, they're going to need to have better and better information. We're talking about transparency, of course. There are a range of different ways that you can do this. Interactive mapping services are very popular. I know OnStar is certainly, they've pioneered several things. That they were very early in trying to ensure that the customer was well communicated to about where the OnStar services should work. And we're in a wonderful place right now where the technologies, while continuing to be improved, are very readily available and can help everyone differentiate the services that they're providing. Mobile applications, obviously, the number of apps in the marketplace is incredible. This is another way and especially an interesting way for the automobile manufacturers to try to engage with customers, to extend their brand inside of the mobile device, to try to ensure that they have all the information when they need it on the road. Obviously, operators have had their own mobile applications for years, and many of them communicate either they communicate network availability information, or they certainly make it easier for their customers to reach out to them should they be experiencing issues. As I mentioned just a second ago, there are lots of networks that are available in this country. Obviously, we've seen a great deal of merger and acquisition activity, and depending on your perspective, that may or may not continue. Nonetheless, there are far more networks out there than most people realize. And when we start thinking about ensuring that, ultimately trying to ensure that the customer has a network to use, knowing where all those networks are is vital to your strategic interest as you're establishing who your partners are. We are in a really good time right now as well. Operators are getting more granular about about what the relative signal quality is of their networks. Obviously, the RF network performance is only one factor, of course, of an overall mobile network experience. Nonetheless, it is really interesting right now where transparency is becoming so important to many operators that they're being very clear to set expectations, to say, you know what, when you get in this part of the network, in home or in basement, and in some cases in vehicle, your experience is not going to be perhaps as good as it is in a different area. And I think this is important for the connected car industry as well, to understand that information is out there. And taking a bit of a step back, none of the networks can exist without, at least none of the mobile networks can exist without licensed spectrum. And understanding where the spectrum depth is, who owns what types of spectrum, will lead, especially with device fragmentation, spectrum fragmentation that we have in this country. These types of issues start to have a real big impact to car manufacturers because of the embedded devices that they're investing in. And so decisions that are made about what types of networks and what types of spectrum an embedded chip or an embedded module has in a device, in a vehicle, gets real important. So we're seeing more and more manufacturers and telematics companies have a much more keen interest in knowing where the spectrum is owned by whom.
Right, and I would just say that's been maybe one of the most interesting developments for those of us that have come from a traditional carrier background, and seeing how the OEMs have had to increasingly worry about spectrum-related policy and other issues. I mean, if you look at how the spectrum is spectrum-based services are being integrated into the vehicle, you've got, we've talked a lot about the in-car connectivity, which, LTE networks and sort of running on underlying license frequency bands that we're all familiar with. But there's a lot of unlicensed aspects to the vehicle that are very much at the forefront today. For example, a lot of the Wi-Fi connectivity in the vehicles is relying on 5 gigahertz spectrum, which is currently the subject of several proceedings at the FCC right now. And you've also got at higher ranges of the 5 gigahertz band, dedicated spectrum that's been allocated for dedicated short range sort of intelligent vehicle uses. And so this is the spectrum that's used when we looked at Chip's picture of the car going through the toll booth earlier. That's the spectrum that sort of reaches out and connects it, to those sort of vehicle to infrastructure applications. You've got emerging vehicle to vehicle applications, up at 77 gigahertz. And so there's a whole mix of frequency bands as these cars are developing the sort of V2X, the sort of advanced driver technologies with better cameras and better radars sort of external to the vehicle. This is where the car really is part of the Internet of Things. And all of this, coming back, is really a spectrum problem. So spectrum scarcity is not just something that the wireless carriers are worried about now. It's something that the OEMs are worried about as well.
Excellent, Jim. Thank you. And regardless of the types of information out there, the the analytical capabilities of each company can vary widely, right? So, as we shift from from providing better information to our customers, to the end customer, to ensuring that these organizations, whether they be the telematics companies, the manufacturers, or the operators, having the right types of information is extraordinarily important. And if you have a big data analytics type of team, there's information that can be consumed in that way, taking and looking at how demographics impact where you build your networks and where you build your next generation networks, and obviously where you start augmenting your networks with small cells and DAS systems and things like that. And then, of course, when you have more commercial types of teams or strategic types of teams, exposing all of those data assets into applications that they can much more readily consume is important. We as Mosaik Solutions are not only a proprietor of information, but we also have consistently iterated our capabilities to ensure that we hit as many use cases as possible. So a lot of people think about spectrum depth data and coverage information and demographics data as real heavy and hard to understand, but we've certainly tried to provide different vehicles to consume our data sets and your data sets, of course, to as many people as possible. So if you have someone who doesn't know how to use a GIS software, we certainly have tools available that can help them ensure that they have that type of information as well. And finally, there are lots of tools in the marketplace today that will help machine-to-machine companies, telematics companies understand where the networks are strong and where they can be improved. As Jim said, and as I've alluded to earlier, some of these network decisions can be pretty heavy, and there's a high amount of commitment there. So making sure that you understand where the networks should be and how they're performing is starting to get much more interesting. You're also seeing a really nice sort of democratization of network testing capabilities now. While you could still have a lot of very, very expensive, heavy engineering grade test equipment, the market has really exploded over the last several years, and we're happy to be a part of that here at Mosaik as well, as you're starting to see much more affordable and analytically interesting solutions being developed for operators and telematics companies. And finally, I wanted to plant a seed about a little bit of an idea. When we start to think about vehicles and how they interact with networks, trying to leverage predictive analytics to try to improve the customer experience. If the application or if the vehicle knows what its experience is going to be, I don't care if it's a network experience or just a traditional running down the road experience, it can react better, right? There's a reason why we have traction control and things like that, right? So in that split second before I realize that I've hit a patch of ice, my car knows it, right? And it responds accordingly. Well, when we think about telematics services and we think about video specifically, it's pretty interesting when you start thinking about if the application or if the vehicle knows what's going to happen to it from a network standpoint, it can support that application better. So if you're doing a mobile video and you're watching an episode of Game of Thrones in the car, the application knows how long the video is, the car knows how fast it's going, and it could theoretically know at what point it's going to leave the LTE footprint. And so then that Game of Thrones video could modify its behavior, cache faster, pull down more of the movie before I leave the LTE footprint to ensure that I don't run into any hangs on my video. This is just something that we wanted to throw out there as a consideration as we think about trying to make all of our lives smarter and all of our applications better. We think that there's an opportunity here for all of us to try to be a bit more thoughtful and proactive about how we manage our customer experience going down the line, and many of you and many of the vendors out there are doing many things like that, of course. So just a bit of seed planting here about that. that's all we've got. We certainly appreciate. I certainly appreciate Jim and Brad and everyone for joining us. With that, I'll turn it over to Kyle, who will wrap things up.
Thanks, Chip. Yeah, we're just about out of time. I don't think we'll have any time for questions, but all the questions asked, we will send them along to the presenters today to follow up directly. And I'm actually going to hand it over to Brad to take us out. Okay, looks like Brad is having a connection issue right now. But anyways, he just wanted to close and remind everyone of the CCA annual convention, September 8th, 9th, and 10th in Las Vegas, and invite everyone to come out to the Mosaik booth in the exhibit hall. With that, I want to thank all of our presenters today. Chip Strange, VP Products and Technology at Mosaik Solutions, Bradley Blanken, VP Industry Development at CCA, and James Barker, Partner at Latham & Watkins. Thank you, everyone.